This is Church's Lame. I'm Scott.
I'm Mark.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a long time.
No.
But basically, we're going to go like narcissistic this week and talk about ourselves. Every week we talk about our opinions, but this week we're going to talk about our opinions on our opinions.
We're getting all meta.
We're getting super meta. So, First of all, thank you to everybody who watched our last video about our thoughts about the church's response to the war in Israel. Appreciate, it's one of our more recently posted videos. It's one of our higher performing videos. So thank you to everybody who's watched it and responded to it. That being said, some of the responses, we in the episode, we specifically talked about how we wanted this to be a nuanced conversation about the church and not about geopolitics. And a lot of the comments just made it about politics anyway, slapping our wrists for either being pro or anti-Israel or Hamas. Hamas. Why did I put an R on that?
I don't know. Like, isn't it like Hermas like some sort of like super expensive brand of clothing or something? Or
words is hard. Yeah. So I really don't like the way what was supposed to be a nuanced conversation turned into something that totally lost dimension. Mm-hmm. So this week we are going to go into the politics of it. And at least if we're going to be judged on our political stances, we're at least going to have a nuanced conversation about our political stances.
And we're going to hope that the internet doesn't internet us on this one again. So,
Well, at least this time, if they internet us on this one, they can't say that we didn't speak our minds wholeheartedly and to the extent that we were able to, right? That we didn't hold back. I personally don't think there's any benefit to talking about the larger story of Israel. Because like we said last week, most Christians are kind of anti-intellectual. And even if they're not anti-intellectual, if they're like me, they're just dumb, right? So either you hate smart people or you aren't a smart person, one or the other, right? So I think your church and your pastor and the people, your inner circle of people that you trust for spiritual education is the place to go talk about that. So I really just kind of want to talk about what is the current state of affairs, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start with two statements that I think are fairly, hopefully, non-controversial. And you can tell me if you agree or disagree, okay?
Sounds good.
And for the record, I hope you disagree. I hope this is not a conversation where we're trying to change each other's minds, but we can demonstrate that you can have a difference of opinion and still be united in faith,
Yeah.
So let me say these two things up front, and hopefully to the world at large, these are not controversial opinions. One, the ongoing treatment of Palestinians in Gaza in the open-air prison is abhorrent. There is no justification, there is no excuse or rationale that can be given that would make the lack of human dignity that has been withheld from them acceptable. I mean, I don't think that's...
And that's not really a controversial statement to make, I don't think.
There are people who are so dug in and enmeshed in a position that they may skip over that. They may just keep going back to their tropes. Well, what about Israel? What about the Promised Land? What about this? But I don't think I've ever met anybody who's ever said, well, yeah, the everyday Palestinian deserves what they got,
Yeah, and it's kind of absurd to suggest that the everyday person is the issue here. I mean, because it's Netanyahu declared war, so he's not throwing junior high kids with rifles at the at Hamas. He's using the military, so it's regular people are getting hurt, have gotten hurt in this situation. They will get hurt, and that's not something I can just stand by and be like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's no, this nonsense needs to end. War is bad.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point though, because when it comes to Palestine, there is no military in that sense.
Yeah,
the terrorists are the citizens are the terrorists. So what is the litmus test to separate a Hamas terrorist from a Palestinian civilian, or that in between gray area of a Hamas sympathizer, you know? What is it when you put the ink on the strip and it runs up and you can separate the different chemicals?
I mean, like, I don't know.
What is that? I don't remember what that process is called, but it's not so easy to separate the three. You know,
Yeah.
Hamas is the duly elected government of the people. They were tired, like it was very much like the election of Donald Trump. They were tired of the corruption and the business as usual, and they were willing to vote in a crazy choice to make change. And now that the repercussions of that are beyond the pale, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But
And
yeah, you bring up a good point that like Netanyahu has brought this one of the world's elite military powers to bear on a couple million people who are living in destitution, you know?
yeah, and it's like the thing that's really frustrating is, that, when we talk about Hamas being, like that's like a legitimately elected government, but
Right.
our government wants to call them a terrorist organization. It's weird to declare a government a terrorist organization. We would just call it a government. We would call it a bad one, or we'd call them corrupt or whatever, but it like that's what it is. But suggesting that, Palestine's government is on any kind of equal footing with Israel's government in terms of, structure and whatnot is a little bit absurd. Just because it's like, it's not quite the same thing.
Right. Except that there are rules in this world, right?
Yeah.
And one of the rules is when you go to war soldier against soldier, military against military, government against government. That's not what Hamas does. What Hamas does is more akin, a terrorist a game book. And so that's why it's easy to put that label on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in a military world, we don't take civilian prisoners. We don't take women and children to make them hostages. And so if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I have a hard time finding any reason not to call it a duck.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I'm just looking at it through just kind of like the lens of language and how we talk about these things. Because there's definitely some severe biases there too. It's like I see one headline that says Israeli military strike kills 100. But
Absolutely.
then a Hamas military strike massacres 10.
Mm-hmm.
Like legitimately, I've seen those two headlines. So Israel only kills 100 people, and it was a civilian target, but Hamas massacres 10 people.
Right.
It's like there's an unevenness in how it's talked about,
Right.
and it's just kind of like we're assigning Hamas is automatically bad. Like they have no legitimate complaint or position to come from to do what they've done. And when it comes to killing civilians, I'm kind of with people on that one. But at the same time, we can't just sit there and excuse the relationship between these two countries and just chalk it down to one person's the bad guy. It's like, no, like any attempt to make peace has failed time and time again, or maybe there was a short-term victory. But there are people that are calling for, the extermination basically of Palestine. I'm not necessarily saying in Israel, but, there are wacko political people here that are calling for Palestine to just be eradicated. So it's like, if that's how people are talking about your country, like that doesn't really put you in the best of places to say, well, we're just going to take it easy and be really strategic. Maybe lashing out wildly is the most sensible reaction for somebody. It doesn't excuse it, but it means that we have to have a more thoughtful response.
Sure, but now after you just spent 2 minutes saying all that,
Yeah.
what's the difference between that and for the last how many decades the Arab world wanting to exterminate all Jews?
Hey, it's no better.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing I want to make sure that we keep coming back to, is that even though we just spent 2 minutes on the plight of the Palestinians, we are not saying that I am not saying that Palestinians are innocent or that I support Israel or anything like that. We just spent 2 minutes making one side of the case. And some of you are going to comment like, how dare you support Palestine? And I'm telling you all to cool your jets. It was just 2 minutes of Mark making a very good case in a very, oh my gosh.
You had to do the peace sign. You had to do the peace sign.
Making a good case in a rational way does not mean that we've taken one side or the other. Because I just, like in a couple words, I just enunciated the other side. Is that it's no different for Palestine. Forever, for all of human history, they've been a people without a home. Now they have that home, and they are still one bad day away from extinction, which is the bummer of being a small country, is that surrounded by countries that hate you, is that your head is always on the chopping block, which is why they are the socio-military economic powerhouse that they are, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be here anymore.
Yeah, and when we're talking about like that part of the world, a lot of Christians will just, what's the word I want to look for? Just uncritically accept that Israel has to exist and it has to continue existing in perpetuity for specifically theological reasons, because they believe that Israel existing means that Christ is going to return very soon, and if like tomorrow Israel just packed it up and went, you know what, we're out of here, these Christians wouldn't know what to do with themselves. I mean, they would legitimately freak out. And the worst part of that to me is just that like it causes a lot of Christians on this side of the ocean to do a lot of, armchair politicking. It's like, you're not a citizen of one of these two countries. You're not a Jew in Israel. You're not a Jew or a Muslim in, Israel or in Palestine. You don't have any stakes in the game, unless you like are from there or have family there. It's like, you don't probably know anywhere near enough to make the call that like ultimately God has to make the call. Like me, all I can do, right? And I think you too, right? We can just see what we see and we can respond. Yeah. And we can at least respond and say like, look, this kind of like fighting, this bloodshed, we don't like it in Ukraine, Sudan, in Korea, we don't like it anywhere. Bloodshed is bad. Yeah. I'm going to keep coming back to that. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's like, to me, that is like my ultimate point for it. It's like, I just want that to end.
Yeah. I would just say that in your rhetorical style, it ends up sounding like the bloodshed of Palestinians is bad, and you want the bloodshed of Palestinians to end.
Well, I mean, it's a conflict between two parties. I want both parties to stop throwing rocks and stuff at each other.
That would be super nice. Okay, let me get back to my train of thought
here. Yeah.
Really quick. The last thing I want to say about the distinction, Palestine, Hamas, and sympathizers. One thing I would like, for those of you who really want to understand this beyond just Christian tropes and media headlines, is that when you hear the word Hamas, you should think Iran. And then when you think Iran, you should think Russia. And so we should be asking ourselves the question. So when Russia and Iran look at the situation in Israel and Palestine, does peace benefit them or does chaos benefit them? Through the chaos process, do they get to paint Israel's supporters, i.e. the U.S., as the bad guy? That's just kind of a little aside, but an important aside, because where do all the money and weapons come from Hamas?
Yeah, and that's that's a sticky thing about world politics, is it tends to involve multiple countries, sometimes on both sides at the same time.
Exactly, and then just because I talked about Hamas, where do you think all the money and weapons come for Israel?
Yeah,
Uncle Sam, right? So nobody's innocent, and I'm not trying to say that one side is right and one side is wrong. I'm saying it's a complex issue. Even if we take away the hundreds and hundreds of years of people without a homeland, even if we only talk about the last 5 decades, it's still a very complex issue, right? And there's plenty of blame to go around, including looking in the mirror as a country and saying the U.S. gets to burden a big part of that, even though I think secretly the British are really to blame. But that's a whole other conversation.
I mean, the British are to blame for most things, I think,
Yes. Colonizers.
Yeah, I mean, they made Canada. Canada made poutine. Just saying, there's a link there.
There's a link. Okay, so in my mind, I had this very well thought out outline. We're drifting around a little bit, but that's okay because I think you're making some great points. So let me just keep kind of marching on here.
All right, march.
Okay. The other thing, in my whole lifetime, I cannot think of a single time where a homeland for the Jews has really been like settled. It's a settled matter. It's fait accompli. It is done. We as a worldwide community accept a homeland for the Jews, right? And the reason that's an important thought to me is because every time Israel responds with force, they get a slap on the wrist every single time.
Yeah.
It's as if the Jewish people are the only people on the face of the earth not allowed to defend their sovereign borders. And like, to me, like, I get it, and I understand that, like, it would kind of help if they didn't overreact every single time something happened. Like, that would be nice. But at the same time, we never question it. Like, we don't question Ukraine's sovereign borders. I think Obama was a pansy for not defending Crimea's sovereign borders. So why is it that Israel is the one place where they're not allowed to use force to defend themselves?
I don't know. I think, when we look at the history, like the map lines, right, it's like, okay, well, who should have what territory? That has been in flux since 1948. It's like there were lines drawn, said, okay, this is going to be Israel, this is going to be Palestine. And, there we go, we're fine. And then there was some wars that happened. And, then all of a sudden those lines got pushed. So there was more Israel and less Palestine. And that has been happening since.
Right.
That is a weird thing because, on the one side, yeah, Israel does have, I think, generally speaking, a right to defend its borders. But then so did, Palestine at that time too. So it's like more of that land's being taken away from them. And, some people talk about, whether there needs to be a one-state solution or a two-state solution. And I believe Netanyahu was like written off a two-state solution, but I might be misremembering that. So correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're right. First of all, yes, I think you're right. I think probably firing missiles into Israel and taking a couple hundred people hostages means that Hamas is probably also written off a two-state solution.
Yeah.
It seems to me like now they are all in some sort of quote unquote final solution,
Yeah. I try to avoid using the phrase final solution in regards to, any group of people really.
Yeah.
So it's like when we look at that, it's, I think, international politics is another place that we can look to be like, this is part of why this conflict is happening. And America and its policies are partly to blame for sure.
Sure.
Because we never, did the hard work to encourage those borders to stay in place. And the U.S. military has been used variously throughout history to do some very interesting work on, national sovereignty throughout the world. So it's like, there's definitely an hypocrisy about how we approach like that specific region.
Yes, for sure. All right, moving on, because I do want to kind of keep this under like 5 hours. So
yeah.
All right, so let's see, where are we at next here? I think we already talked about this, but let's just skate through it real quick. Is there still an Arab desire to experience a world without the Jews? And I think I've kind of said, I think there is. I think there is very clearly still an appetite among Arabs to see this nuisance go away. And once again, I just kind of bring that up because here in America, we don't even think about it. We are so incredibly confident. The lazy Mexicans and the socialist Canadians are never going to invade our borders, and our sovereignty and our country's borders are impregnable. Words is hard. Impregnable. Like, we are so secure in that the United States will live in perpetuity. And I think that's important to remember. Whether or not we like it, from the Israel perspective, they are always one bad day away from not existing.
Yeah, our situation is definitely different here. And I think that's what makes like the armchair politicizing about this kind of thing even more annoying. And it's like annoying when I do it, right? Because it's like I think it was Stalin who said it, but it was like, it's like I'm jealous of America because they have weak neighbors to the north and south and fish to the east and west.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's like we have a very specific view of things, and like we haven't had in our lifetimes, we haven't had to use violence or think about violence in terms of defending our territory or defending our population, like directly. We've had some terrorist attacks, but like you don't mobilize the military to defend against a terrorist attack. They happen, and then you have to do something after the fact.
Like even if our borders were at stake, we would probably never hear about it, right? We'd never hear about some Russian nuclear sub, doing a Hunt for Red October thing and coming up on our shores and having to be chased away by our own submarines. That's a story that would never be told. So the real stories of danger are never told, so that everybody could live, calm, peaceful lives with their 2.5 kids and white picket fences.
Yeah, and and then like looking at the Middle East, I mean that region of the world, it's the borders, the nations, like the people, the religions, the cultural traditions, like it's a lot going on in a much smaller area.
Yeah.
I mean, because when you think of, the United States being, I'm going to say, homogenous, but I'm going to put that in some, heavy air quotes, right? We're a lot more homogenous than that region over a much bigger space.
Yeah.
And so I think that also kind of goes into how we tend to view what's going on over there. It's like we look at, Israel like it's the West Coast, but
right.
And, it's not that big. So, when we're looking at all of those things, it's like a lot of people that have had like a lot of historical tensions are very close to each other. And so I think that just kind of creates a backdrop where, I'm not going to say that war is more likely, but friction is a lot more present.
Right.
And
that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yep. All right, let's move on here. I think we've brushed by this as well, but I really would like to go a little bit deeper into this one. And just for the viewer, all I did was write down a bunch of what I think are the central questions that we should ponder before we go out making snap judgments about all this. I think one of the questions that kind of haunts all of us, because we'd all like to think of ourselves as all sin is sin, and no sin is worse than any other, even though that's the way our churches operate all the time. Mm-hmm. Right. I used to have a pastor who used to say, violence is good, sex is bad. Like when he's talking to youth groups and stuff. And so, but like, I think we really do have to come to a reckoning about, is the kind of atrocity that we see done to the Palestinians and Hamas, and, once again, I use the phrase open air prison. I don't think 15 years in, like it's a very well kept secret anymore, that the people of Palestine, were just hard, are treated awfully, right? So is the human rights violations committed against the Palestinians, is that equivalent, better, worse, equal to the terrorist acts that are committed against Israel? And I do use the word terrorism because, once again, these are acts that are not focused on government and military. They are focused on wreaking havoc with the population. So are these equivalent things? And there's a part of me that wants to say, yes, all violence is bad. It's all equivalent. But there's a part of me that also can't get there. There's a part of me that sees the distinction and cannot ignore it. And I want to know if you feel the same way, or if you are able to just say, yeah, all violence is bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for me, it's like all violence is just, done to those who do not deserve it is equally bad. Whether you've maimed people or killed people, I mean, it's like there is like a level of difference to me, there. It's like if I punch you, but then you kill my dog, like it's a little bit of a different thing. But putting people in open air prisons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's none of this is good.
Sure.
It's like you can't claim to be, to have the moral high ground when you're acting immorally. So, it's like, well, Hamas attacked, a civilian target. Okay, well then you can attack Hamas military targets because they're the ones that are shooting the stuff.
But there are none. That's my point. There are none. It's Palestine. There are none.
It's like, I mean, but like not all Palestine is a military target. You know, there are things going on there. So it's like, to me, it's just like, we got to end the violence, period.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not going to wag my finger and say, you know, well, you don't have justification for, you know, going to war against Palestine when you've gotten attacked like that. But how you go about it needs to be better than the way it was gone about you.
Interesting. Okay, so
let's not the best way of saying that.
So this leads right into my next point then, or my next question, and so this is super important then. If you're Hamas, there is no shortage of government and military targets to target, right? Like they've got freaking laser-based weapons now in Israel, right? They're shooting missiles out of the skies with laser beams at this point. So there is no shortage of military targets. But if you're Israel looking for quote-unquote high-value targets, what do you do when Hamas is storing weapons underneath hospitals and schools and fire departments? You know, what do you do when all the high-value targets are underneath civilian installations?
And yeah, this is the armchair politicking here that I don't want to engage in. But you know, my only answer would be like, just don't indiscriminately bomb the area. You know, it's like maybe take control and seize control of a territory so you can remove the element that needs to be removed. So if you need to take out a weapons cache, don't blow up the hospital, take over the hospital, get rid of the weapons, yada, yada, yada.
So better to be an occupying force than to have collateral damage.
And that, yeah, like, I mean, to me, collateral damage is the worst part of war.
Is the worst part,
yeah.
Right. I understand that. I appreciate that. And that actually helps a lot in understanding the difference that we have is that, like, you're really focused on the collateral damage and not so much about the geopolitics.
Oh, I mean, the geopolitics are interesting, but yeah, it's like just the people that don't want to be part of the fight getting hurt is just awful.
Sure. Or getting dead. Yeah. So where are we at next here? You and I actually had a short conversation about this after our last episode, but neither one of us had the wits about us to actually vocalize it during the episode. Isn't it ironic that it's God's own people wandering in the desert without a place to call home that has now forced Palestine, words is hard, into effectively the same situation? They are living in squalor without the access to move freely, to worship where they choose to worship, to be who they want to be when they want to be it. Isn't it interesting that God's own people have now become the oppressors?
They are just like, people have been displaced of their homes. I mean, like within the territory of Israel, Palestinians who are living there have been kicked out of their homes. And there's been a lot of problem, with that whole situation. And so, yeah, like they're making this people a homeless people. And it's like, where's all that stuff in the Torah about, like, treating the foreigner and the stranger and the sojourner well? That seems to have disappeared. But then I think that's like a big difference between, the nation state of Israel and God's people Israel as recorded in Scripture. Like, they're not automatically the same thing.
Exactly, and they're not even close to the same thing anymore. Which, once again, I refer you to our last episode. The Israel that exists today has nothing to do with the Israel of the Bible, from my point of view. And the two of them should not be discussed in the same breath. Not that you could. Like, how do you do that? Like, okay.
Well, I don't think you're supposed to speak two things at the same time. I think you just speak them serially without breathing.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, by the way, Alanis Morissette. For those of you who did know Alanis Morissette from the Jagged Little Pill era and who idolized her from that, do a quick search for Alanis Morissette and Star Search. And I will just say you're welcome for that.
I'm not going to search for that. I'm just saying that right now.
Not if you don't want your dreams to be crushed. Yeah. But if you're willing to take a little bit of a ride, you will not be disappointed.
Yeah. Like, all right. Yeah. I did almost look up like the where are they now for all the people that were in Children of the Corn.
Yeah.
Just because I'm curious.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
It's October.
Right. The $1 million question that nobody has a good answer to is, what is Israel supposed to do? And I think that's kind of what I've been hinting at through my series of questions. It's like, what are you supposed to do? You are a superpower and you do have sovereign borders. Are you just supposed to sit by and do nothing while terrorists lob missiles into your country, while terrorists take your civilians hostage? Is that acceptable behavior? That, like, any U.S. president that allowed 200 people to become hostages and did nothing, like, would be impeached and removed from office immediately. Mm-hmm. I understand the sentiment of what about Palestine? I get that part of the sentiment. I don't understand the part of the sentiment that is being incredibly critical of Netanyahu for having to bow for the realities of the real world and saying we need to respond. We need to respond now. We need to respond unequivocally. And we need to respond in a way that says this will not end well for you. I don't understand what that criticism is about.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't like what happened, but again, like, I can't look at it without going, just because of exactly what you just said. Like, it's too hard to say, well, you shouldn't have done that. I mean, for me, it's more like, yeah, like, this maybe could have been avoided. You know, I don't know that for a fact. I mean, but like, there's that part of me that's like, you know, I'm wondering how much of this could have been avoided. And that's the only finger wagging I can attempt to do.
Yeah.
Is like, you know, if you didn't do enough work to avoid the fight, when somebody punches you in the face, I'm not going to jump in and like stop it. You know?
Yeah. My criticism is just like, we know that one of the benefits of having lots of money is that you get choices in this world, right? Mm-hmm. You get choices that you have when you're not poor. And Israel, so because of that, Israel, they have wealth, they have resources, they have the support of every first world nation in the free world, you know? So they have choices for how to respond. But then I asked the same question about Palestine. What is Palestine supposed to do? How do you convince the world that you're a people of peace when it's your own people who join up with Hamas and carry out these horrible actions? And you have no money, you have no resources, you don't have the sympathy and support of the world. What do you do to bring awareness to your plight, to put a spotlight on the injustice in a world that seems to care less and less about injustice in favor of capitalistic advancements? You know, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, and like, just to put some scale to that too, I mean, like, when you have the United States has been a political friend and a military friend.
Words is hard, I get it.
Yeah, to Israel for, you know, decades. Right. So it's like, you know, you're in a quote unquote country that's getting smaller and smaller by the decade. And the chief aggressor for, you know, your situation is your neighbor, who is backed by one of the most powerful countries in the world. You know, yeah, like, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's complicated. And I just wish it's like one of those, you know, take out Harry Potter's magic wand and say something that sounds like Latin, and then poof, like, everybody figures it out. There's an extra piece of land in the Mediterranean and all the Palestinians live there or something.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly. I would like to say this, though, in really, like, in a serious attempt to kind of say something that maybe I haven't heard said very much. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard it all said on TV and in the media, and haven't heard anything really like this said in the social media circles either. And it's this: if you're Palestine or Israel, and you are serious about living up to the hype that you try to create about living peacefully with one another, if you're serious about that, you cannot be the people who are constantly the first ones to fire the gun. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In this most recent case, you know, yes, we can talk about the ongoing plight of Palestine, but there was a clear event that fired off a gun that was the first domino that fell in every event that has since followed. You know, and once again, it's a curse on both sides, because we can see this happening on both sides. Like, if you want to gain some like real currency in the world of being taken seriously, you've got to stop being the aggressor. And sometimes you just kind of have to live with compromise, and nobody wants to. And like here in America, nobody wants to anymore, right? We all want to look what's happening in the House of Representatives right now. This guy wants to be the House Speaker so bad that he's had 2 failed attempts to get the votes that he needs, but he's still pushing on. So nobody ever wants to compromise. But if anybody wants to be taken seriously on the world stage about the plight of their people, you got to stop being the first one to pull the trigger.
Yeah. And, when we're like looking at it as Christians and, thinking, love your enemy is something that Jesus said.
Right.
And, it's important to say that, when you say, you have to love your enemy, it doesn't mean you don't have enemies anymore because you love them. They are still your enemy. Understanding why they're your enemy informs how you need to love them. And unfortunately, like maybe the situation between Israel and Palestine wasn't one such where either one of them could have tried loving their enemy and have it end well.
Yeah.
But each of these places has, friends and neighbors who could have also jumped in and done that too. So it's one of those, like, if you have, like a church community and, you have one person is just horribly suffering and nobody ever helps them out, whose fault is that?
Right.
And it's not me just trying to equivocate, but it's another thing to put on the pile of something to think about, I think,
Anyway, we are Church is Lame. And you may have heard this, you might have watched this episode or heard this podcast and thought to yourself, man, Mark and Scott, they're really pro this or anti this or whatever. And what you heard is, well, I'm looking at the counter now, roughly a 40-minute conversation of some loosely formed thoughts. And what we are is pro-Jesus. We are pro-love. We are pro-peace. We are, I don't know, in one sense, we are hippies, and we would love just to see like peace, love, and dope reign throughout the world. Understanding that we live in the real world, we're just trying to have conversations that spread a little bit of reality to all of the craziness the conversation is going on right now. So if you have anything you want to add to the conversation, by all means, leave a comment, give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down, give us a rating. If you really want to have it out with us in long form, send us an email, churcheslamepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support us in more meaningful ways, by all means, hit us up on Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon or Super Thanks or one of those things. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
And with that, go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.
Hey, if you really liked this video and you want to see more stuff just like this, there's going to be a cue card up here with a playlist. I don't know exactly what it's going to be called, but click, 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 click. Thanks a lot.